mixing it up. When I was a kid, my mother was an actress, but she volunteered at what was then the Cryle VA in Cleveland. And she created, with World War II paraplegics and quadriplegics, a radio station produced by them and for them. And on Thanksgiving and Christmas, we always had a few vets visiting. And what a gift to me, you know, to be 2 or 3 and 4 years old and see people who had really been injured and just be with them. And so I reiterate how really essential I think it is to mix it up. And the last thing I wanted to say is getting back to the girl issue.
Yeah.
The worst thing about this, and we will talk about MST and other issues that are very much, unfortunately, flavor of the week, these women who are enlisting or going to the academies, they're extraordinary women, and they have had their careers stolen. And we need them. They are extraordinary, these women. I mean, I think, this is now I'm being sexist, but they're really extraordinary women. They have moxie and they're brave, and as a rule, it's a way to get to college. And it's a terrible loss for the military to lose them. And it's a terrible loss for us as a society when they either retire from the military or just are hurt and leave. It's a huge loss. The women in particular are extraordinary because it's just, they're the largest growing demographic, but it's a big deal for a woman to say, I'm going to go there. And they're pretty incredible women.
As the one guy on the panel, I will say that one of the most extraordinary things about my time here at the Kennedy School teaching here is exactly that point. The number of military women that I've had in classes over the years and that I've gotten to know are really some of the most exceptional students I've had here, frankly. And a lot of what I've learned about the military and about these wars in particular and about the kind of moxie that women can bring to national service, I've learned through them. So I just wanted to, not that you needed a cosign on that, but I will cosign on that. A little solidarity moment. And speaking of solidarity moments in women, one of the things that struck me, both about the film itself and about the relationships, the individual and collective relationships in the film, is how much that you're creating, in a sense, a collective narrative of a group of women who are now bonded with one another, right? Who may not have, by virtue of the fact of being maybe the only women in their platoons or their schools or their training regiments, that they may have felt a certain amount of isolation. They were the only one, or one of only a few in a sea of men, right? And then they go off to war and they come back and maybe are isolated again when they come back as mothers, as sisters, as daughters, etc. And they feel so alone. And that was one of the themes in the film. But what happens in the film is that you start to see these relationships between women grow from isolation to one-on-one relationships, friendships, chance meetings, online networking, and then ultimately this group of advocates who are now speaking at the Capitol, who are meeting with senators and Congress people, who are taking a certain kind of ownership. And it was really through these relationships that they had women-to-women relationships, a kind of female solidarity, that power grew over the course of the film. And I'm wondering how representative that is, whether it was your intention on some level to create a film that would be a catalyst for that kind of solidarity among women, and whether or not you think that it seemed to me at least that was one, if not the most powerful site of empowerment from a situation of isolation and disempowerment that was really sort of screaming out from the film.
Totally conscious.
Okay, I figured, but I thought I'd ask.
The day we decided to do this project, we started Facebook groups. Because the things that make women more prone to have the problems they develop also makes them able to heal. First of all, they have each other's back in a way that is the military. And then they're women. And, you know, coffee talk. I mean, women talk to each other. It's just a tradition, and they support each other, and we definitely tried to show that. And I think some of it is just from habit, as women, but I also think it gets reinforced. No matter what kinds of hell they've gone through, it does get reinforced with military training. They have each other's backs, and there's a very strong sense of that. Don't you find, the people you're representing?
And I'm wondering, and from a legal perspective and a psychological perspective, there's something about this, right? Are there strength in numbers from a legal advocacy perspective? And is there a kind of liberating psychological moment when you realize that I am not alone? I'm actually part of a large cohort of people who have had similar kinds of experiences, who experience trauma or stress or shell shock or whatever in similar kinds of ways, and we can begin to see those similarities and develop a kind of collective strength that we might not have actually individually. Is there something to that?
What I found, and at this point we have I guess, 4 suits going, and we have over 100 rape survivors, men and women. And for us, the critical issue really is credibility. Each of these rape survivors, when they reported the rape, no credibility. There was an assumption they were lying, they were minimized, they were retaliated against. You saw that in the film. And so by putting groups together, you basically get rid of the credibility issue, because it simply is not credible to think 48 people came forward and lied in similar ways about their experiences. And these are people, different services across the nation, deployed differently. And I was struck by, when I began to listen to people, I was struck at just how much they all endured the same thing. It's the retaliation that hit so hard. Because these women warriors, this was their career. They were women warriors. That's what they were going to do. That's what they wanted to do. So as one put it so bluntly, well, gee, if I had known that to report a crime, I'd have to give up my career. I'm not sure I would have reported it. And yet that's the dilemma they're being faced with, that Hobson's choice. So I do think the power in numbers, and it makes the political impact. It gets over what you really find is. What I think when I look at what they have endured, one of the things I'm struck by is, they signed on for a hostile environment of a certain sort. They signed on to be shot at. They signed on, for the most hostile environment you could imagine. But I don't think they signed on, nor should they be forced to endure the kind of openly misogynistic culture that, that hostile environment that's hostile because they are female. So I think there, the banding together is important, and frankly, it's what's discouraged while they're in. There's this notion they're told, don't tell any of your friends that you were raped, don't tell anybody else. There's an attempt to isolate the survivors from each other so that they will not band together to seek justice internally. So hopefully, with the different actions being taken, hopefully that'll begin to overcome those obstacles.
And also,
can I ask you guys to please speak into the microphone? So that would really help. Thanks.
And also, another thing too that I was struck by is both the kind of sexist culture that so many of them are subjected to, but also in at least one instance, a kind of the corrective rape, right, the homophobia that fuels that kind of thing, and the intersection of those two forms of power and oppression that was quite striking in that. This idea, and to me, the woman who was a lesbian, who had been subjected to sexual trauma as a form of correction of her sexuality, seemed to me to be the one who was, in some ways, most kind of alienated from the group, most traumatized in some of the blank stare, the idea that she couldn't even say the word, this idea that...
She was active duty
when
we did that interview.
Oh, fascinating.
She was in a wounded warrior unit,
wow.
And she was active duty, and it was before a suicide attempt.
Oh, boy.
Which, and by the way, Layla's in good shape.
Good.
But,
good.
Yes.
Also, you heard her say, Layla say in the film, that she hadn't told her therapist, but she was talking to this other woman who'd been through something similar. We mustn't lose sight of the healing powers of somebody. We got to stop assuming therapists know how to fix everything, because we don't. Certainly not war trauma, certainly not rape trauma, and we have to understand the healing power of connecting with people in the community. And one of the things that isolates, that is so isolating, is the use of psychiatric diagnosis. There are more hours to talk about the fact that psychiatric diagnosis is not at all scientific, and giving somebody a label does not improve outcome and causes a lot of harm. And I'd been working on that for over a quarter of a century, and I was horrified when I learned that victims of military sexual trauma, when they report it, the way it's often dealt with is by saying, well, you're not upset because you were raped, you're upset because you have a personality disorder. You know, the flavors of the month, bipolar or borderline, were the most common ones. So what it does, whether your trauma was from war or rape or both, what it does is it makes it look like the problem is an individual intrapsychic one. That's where the problem arises, rather than what was done to you. And that is so isolating. So when people talk about the women's consciousness raising groups from the 70s, that was about saying, oh my God, it's happened to you too, so maybe it wasn't my fault when it happened to me, and maybe the personal is political, maybe it's a systemic problem. And when I started talking to Patty Stoddard about this, and about the way that once you get a psychiatric label, it greases the skids, right? It gets you, you don't get services paid for, because this is not a service-connected disability, right?
I probably had a ticket on my car because I was running it, but I couldn't leave the film. So I just wanted to tell you that it was totally worth the $25. The film was great, and I loved that it does bring you in. In fact, I found myself getting distressed watching it in part because I do this work all the time, not necessarily always in the military, but it is hard. And so the one thing I did want to say before I ask a question is, I do think it's really, really hard to make people comfortable in the discomfort of hearing people's pain. And that's such a huge issue in my work with rape victims, because it's just the ick factor. Nobody wants to go there. And to make people go there comfortably, I think, is a challenge. And this film really does bridge a lot of the gap that I think probably people need to be bridged, to be encouraged, invited, and in some ways give permission to say, oh, you're in the military, tell me about PTSD, because it's almost like saying to somebody in a wheelchair, what happened to you, and you don't know if they're going to say none of your damn business or thank you for asking. So I do think that's a problem for people in the military, that you don't know if they're going to be happy or upset if you impose your question, even in a caring way. And I do think this film is going to help to, I don't know, at least open the dialogue about that. I think it's, I was laughing a little bit about, the notion that in a hyper-masculine environment like the military, you can actually expect women to be respected. Because, rape victims in the real world are treated worse. And I would think if you go into the military, and the reason women are treated poorly when they report rape in the real world is because of sexism and patriarchy and male entitlement, and we want to perpetuate. Law is designed to perpetuate sexual assault, to not protect against it, and that's the real world problem. And then you go into the military and expect to be respected. That was the first time I heard about military sexual trauma as a word. I said, oh good, at least it has a word. I had never seen anybody be treated with respect, much less be believed or get justice. So I do feel like it's huge to change gender norms in the real world, where we at least have constitutional principles. We can go into court and cite the Constitution and have a fighting chance. You can't even do that in the military, legal proceeding, internally as a grievance matter, or externally, the legal standards, God knows, Susan, I don't know how you even get through the door sometimes, because they basically have built-in immunity. Right? We can rape with immunity. Didn't you read section 5.2, right? And there's a real issue getting justice, period. And I love that you are so brave at what you do. But so coming full circle, and as an impact litigator, I'm always interested in taking on systems. I love the notion of class actions, and getting the pocketbook usually does provoke far more change faster than asking people to give a damn, even with a good film. But so the question, I guess, is, just in film, because I felt so much betrayal as part of the pain, I wished, and I wonder if you thought about this, I wished there would have been a confrontation, just like the McDonald's person, right? You don't like my dog? What the hell is wrong with you? I need my dog. And being offended in, you know, the notion of not being allowed to do what is your protected right under the ADA. I would have liked to have seen somebody challenge one of those higher-ups who said, screw you, you were raped. We don't care. We're not going to believe you. We're going to call you crazy. The systemic, not just tolerance, the systemic mandate that that is the response for the purpose of deterring reporting. I want to embarrass those people who gave the women the feeling of betrayal when they expected to be, you know, hugged as I reported a rape in the military and I'm here volunteering and I reported rape and you betrayed me. You betrayed me. That's not in the film in the way that I would have liked, which is shame brought to those who made them feel that.
I have two reactions. The first of which is, our lawyer told us not to.
I believe that.
Seriously, our attorney who specializes in intellectual property and looks at movies all the time, she watched it and literally her first words were, you know what, you need to recut Layla's scene because when she says where she was, which A, we shouldn't do because she was active duty, but you are going to make an allegation and then you'll open yourself up to all kinds of lawsuits. That's one answer. The second answer about the pain and that you felt so much that it frustrated you is that one of the gifts to our project was that we were impoverished. We literally had Marcia holding the camera and the two of us there. There were scenes, if you know about making a film, Marcia was like in bed with Brigitte to get some of those. So number two, we were poor. And number three, it was extremely important to us to be heard by both sides of the aisle and to raise the issues and to make people feel and just give these women a platform on which to speak. And it worked. We got to the Senate, and which was a platform of historic proportion. I would like, there are a lot of people I'd like to beat up, you know, all these, but we consciously chose not to do that, and we consciously chose to have this be a film that you left feeling hope. Because that's what we experienced, knowing these women. And I experience it on the social networks. They save each other's lives. They will find, B is nodding her head. Layla, I mean, she said this in front of the Senate, so I guess I can say it in front of you. Layla was online. Brigitte saw her saying she wanted to kill herself. She called me up. I knew a vet who lived near her, and that person drove her to Walter Reed, which hadn't closed yet. I mean, talk about have your back, and I just thought, you know, let's not go. There are lots of reasons to be angry, but I want people like you and Susan to do that, because I don't want to lose, you know, this is really kind of over the top, but there is something about the military at its best, which is so noble. I'm not saying it works in the real world. I'm just saying it's so noble. And we did not want to spoil that in this film. We just wanted the women to tell their stories. And we thought that if lawyers felt like you feel, they might take them on. Class action suits or whatever. And we knew that Jackie Spear had started STOP, and we knew that Nancy Parrish was putting up Protect Our Defenders, and we knew about Swan and lawsuits. So we thought it would be unusual, even though we started earlier, having very little money lets the process take a while. We knew that we might be the only project that people would leave feeling like they had met women who had served, not just who had had, because it's a new demographic, and it's the largest growing demographic in the military.
But I was thinking when the film was going on about, boy, the U.S. military is there anything that can be learned with the integration of African Americans into the U.S. military? And is there any way to kind of think about, at the time of integration, it was highly contentious, right? I mean, it was really problematic. It seems like in the military that it's much more of a level playing field, no matter what racial, ethnic background you come from. And it seems to me that if that an institution can handle this, even though it's highly, hyper-masculine and so on, and that's been the tradition, what's being done to kind of address that and to look at what the military has been able to do in terms of these other issues and what it can do for this particular issue?
Well, I do think it's important to look back and learn what we can from history. And there is a lot that the military can do using its own internal structure, the chain of command structure, in order to ensure that there are equitable opportunities and that women are treated appropriately. The one piece, though, and this is where I think the situation on rape and sexual assault is different and it's not as easily solved, and that's the following. You need an adjudicatory process that's fair to the defendant as well. You cannot simply say, okay, the chain of command is now going to, we're going to cure this problem, and what we're going to do is we're going to convict every perpetrator. That does not work. We don't want that. That is not the right solution. So unlike the effort to eradicate racism, in order to eradicate rape and sexual assault, we have to go back to the basics of an operational judicial system that is fair to both the perpetrator and to the victim, right? And so that's where we need to get. And that's actually where it runs right smack into the military not wanting to cede any power that traditionally resides in the chain of command. So right now, the chain of command, the commander, has the power to kind of open the spigot and let your allegation proceed into the military's judicial system or stop it. Now, from our view, that's an inherent conflict of interest because that person, they are in the chain of command. They know, usually they know both the perpetrator and the victim. They've already formed views. The rest of our judicial system, it says, all right, what we assume about human nature is that you do a better job of being impartial if you don't have pre-existing relationships. That's why if you're asked to serve on a jury, you're asked, do you know the accused? And if you do, you're excused from the jury. So we actually think you have to depart from the military's desire to solve it themselves. And instead say, let's create a functioning judicial system that doesn't have that conflict of interest. And I would note that's not a radical notion. I mean, it's modernizing military justice. The United Kingdom has done it, Canada has done it, Australia has done it. So, we think that you've got to go further. You can't just say the military needs to clean this up on their own. It just doesn't work.
Just very briefly, it's a too well-kept secret that there is still an enormous amount of racism in the military. And so I don't think there's a model to be followed there for, well, they got rid of racism, now they can just use that to get sexism. No, but I just mean there hasn't been nearly enough done about racism in the military. But when I was doing the research for my book, I had a heck of a time finding any acknowledgement that there's racism in the military today. It's all talked about how it used to be there a long time ago.
We're going to continue with the Q&A. I had warned the panelists that we needed to kind of break the event at 6:30 because that's when we advertised it would end. Some people may need to leave now. The panelists said they would stay. You're most welcome to stay and ask more questions and answers. But I would like to thank all of the panelists that they came here at their own expense to present this film today and to be a part of this Q&A. I just want to thank them before we kind of allow people to leave to have to go someplace at 6:30. So thank you all.
Hi, my name is Ross Kaufman. I'm in the United States Army now. I've been in for about 23 years. My wife was in the Army for 10 years, and I have 3 daughters, so all these issues impact me personally on many levels. there's so many things I want to talk about. I love the film. I absolutely love it. And it brings to light so many issues that are pressing and relevant in today's society and in the military. So I could talk for hours right now on just the fascinating questions and on the other things that have been brought up. But as I saw the film, the most troubling thing in the film, and I think it's been brought up as of late, is the sexual assault, the reporting to the chain of command. And what I'd like to say is, having been a commander in the United States Army for close to 3 years prior to coming to the Kenny School, it's all about that trust and that soldier in the chain of command. And that trust, those parents gave their child to the Army expecting fair treatment of them and anyone that does them wrong. I don't necessarily agree with you, Susan, on your revamping of the military system. What I'd say is that we need to ensure that our leaders in the United States Army, and I think most of them do, approach situations such as this in a manner that puts the burden of proof on the government, but it follows through to see justice, whichever side of the scales that tips. Having had 3 instances in the unit I commanded, 2, the burden of proof could not be met by the lawyers, and 1 it could, and that was fairly dealt with. The unfortunate part is these events occur and you cannot prove them. And I'm sure that she's left now, but I'm sure that that's the same way in the civilian world. I can't speak to that. But we have to relentlessly pursue that. And I'm sorry I'm on a roll here, but the other thing that Ms. Kaplan, you brought up, the PTSD. Right now, I think that, well, there's a funny film on the internet, and it's a horrible film, but the last scene is absolutely side-splitting. And it's things that civilians say to veterans, okay? And it's a parody, and it's done by airmen, I believe, that put this thing together. But the last scene is a man and a woman laying in a bed, and the sheets at their neck, and I think she's reaching over to touch his shoulder, and he says, "Hold on a second, can I catch PTSD?" Okay, so we have an education problem, but in this, at least for soldiers, it's become a term of familiarity that we're trying to remove the stigma, and it's starting to work. So if you start if you relabel that, and I'm interested in your thoughts on any of that, but so I'd like to hear what your comments are, Paula, if you would.
Thank you. The term PTSD doesn't remove stigma because it is in the Manual of Mental Disorders. And when it first went in, when PTSD was created, every one of these labels represents a construct, right? People are suffering, there's no question about that. But when you decide to we're going to put this collection of symptoms together in a box and say, does that fit you or not? It was wonderful, the reason that it was conceived of, because, as you know, Vietnam vets were suffering, people weren't paying attention. So the people who conceived of this notion of creating PTSD as a construct did it as a way to say, we need to pay attention to the suffering. The problem was, they said, now let's get it in the diagnostic manual. So it's the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Disorders. When it first went in, decades ago, it had one saving grace, which was, there was the sentence, this is a normal reaction to an abnormal experience. Now that was kind of strange, because it meant, we're saying it's normal, but we're putting it in the Manual of Mental Disorders. They wanted it in there because the assumption, which is incorrect, was that will get services covered, and the nature of the services will be therapy and drugs, and that will fix it. but it too often doesn't. And I've heard from so many vets who say they take their drugs, they go to their therapist, even if the therapist is very good, and it's at the very least not enough. Sometimes it even causes harm, it's at the very least not enough. And I know General Corelli has suggested what's presented as a major step forward. Let's take the D off PTS. If you think that everybody is not going to still think the D when they hear PTS, it's a Band-Aid, and it doesn't remove stigma. Calling it what it really is, war trauma, removes the stigma of mental disorder, because everybody can get that war is devastating. And there have also been studies. I get really sad when I hear about these anti-stigma campaigns, because the research on anti-stigma campaigns is that they increase stigma, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but what seems to happen is the message that gets conveyed is they're really qualitatively different from you. Don't mistreat them, don't think ill of them because of that, which increases the sense of distance and differentness. And I think it's disingenuous for mental health professionals, organizations, to say, well, the problem isn't with diagnosing, the problem isn't with treatment, the problem is that other people stigmatize them if we diagnose them. And that isn't really the problem.
Now, as you turn, if you want to change that vernacular, then, well, is it different? Are you different?
Right, but here's the thing, and I think it's an illusion to think that if you tell me you have PTSD, I understand what that means, because no two people who have that label are the same. Even their symptoms are not going to be identical. If you say to me, I can't go to sleep because I have nightmares, or if you say to me, I feel rage all the time, or if you say to me, I hit the ground when I hear a truck backfire, then I understand what you're going through, then I know the specifics. But to say I have PTSD gives the illusion, I mean, at most it's saying I'm suffering.
But isn't that a clinical approach? I mean, for the common vernacular of the Army or people who are dealing with veterans, you're approaching it very clinically, like you're saying it's PTSD, which covered, you're lumping every problem that could possibly go wrong or every reaction to a wartime situation as PTSD, and that's incorrect. But for the person who's trying to communicate to someone and doesn't necessarily want to get into those details, I have PTSD, oh, okay, I have an appointment, I need to go because I'm having PTSD issues. That's fine. So I'm not sure what it helps to change the term.
Well, I don't want to help perpetuate the cover-up, and whether the soldier or the vet is speaking to somebody else who's going through it, or somebody in the military, or a civilian, it's the listener is in a better position to understand and to offer help, or at least understanding, if they use words that communicate something. And I'm saying PTSD is so general that it creates the illusion that they've communicated something and that we'll understand. And to say I'm suffering because I've been at war, everybody understands that. And whether I'm a therapist or just a civilian listener or somebody in the family, I get it better if they use non-clinical, non-jargon terms.
Something I experienced over and over as I talked to these women was the issue of the transitioning out process. And there are times in life, even though I haven't been there, when I think being fully in touch with your feelings are useful, like at war. So, people prepare themselves by getting rid of a lot of the dynamics emotionally that are the very things that help you get well. And what I've always heard is this catch-22 from the ladies I spoke with, was that, first of all, the transitioning out programs aren't anything to write home about right now, but they do exist, if you want to call them that. But nobody wants to stay there because they want to see their families. and they want. So I would throw back at you that an interesting thing to think about, whatever we call it, is finding a way to have the warrior transition back where they don't have to stay away from their partners, their children, and yet they can embrace it as part of the military experience so that it isn't humiliating to them. Because he's not on anymore. Maybe you noticed when Mariette and everybody said at some point, particularly Alicia, that they tell everybody they have it. And they all spoke to me about how they wished that had been part of, and an interesting interview, we interviewed a Navajo veteran. And I was curious why he wanted to join the U.S. military when we had exterminated his people. And he said, because I fight for the land. Well, first of all, I was completely moved by that response, and I felt like a spiritual midget. But aside from that, he talked about how he felt he had PTSD as badly as he did because the military didn't even have the simplest things in place that the Navajo culture did for warriors coming home. So I would say, whatever you call it, if part of it could be just like, you've been through something huge and everybody needs to go through this process, and by the way, you get to see your kids and or the person you love or your parents or whatever. Just a thought I have about that. The transitioning out taps, right?
Transitioning out of the Army or transitioning once you return from deployment. I don't.
Both.
And I think there's a program, the latter is better. We are doing a better job, not perfect, post-deployment than we did. Like when I was in the Iraq invasion, we came home, Desert Storm non-existent. Like, Desert Storm, it was done. So we're not perfect, but we're making strides. The transition out of the Army and ensuring that veteran has been properly diagnosed so that he or she can go to the VA and get the help. I can't speak to that. There is a system, I just don't know the quality of it at this time. But yeah, I think we can always get better.
I'm Chris Maddox. My name is Chris Maddox. I'm also a National Security Fellow. I'm an active duty Air Force officer. I wanted to thank you for the film. I really did enjoy it. And I appreciated the fact that it presented the issues in a very fair and even manner and put them on the table. And that was really helped the impact, I think. I wanted to bring up a little bit about policy changes in the Department of Defense, and maybe Susan, you can talk to this on how aware you are of the recent policy changes. In the last 10 years, it's changed dramatically. We've gone to the restricted, unrestricted reporting system, at least in the Air Force. I can't speak for the services. I've had the good fortune of being a member of the dreaded chain of command twice. I've been a commander 2 times, once at the Air Force Academy and once at my last assignment. The Air Force Academy was cadets, very young people, college-age folks, so a different environment. But I wanted to get your perspective from your experience on the changes that have been made, because we have made some very significant changes in the policy. I don't know how familiar folks in the room are in that we are mandatory reporters in the chain of command. If a sexual assault is brought to our attention, we don't have the option from a policy standpoint of saying, well, we're not going to look into that. That's silly.
The military's adjudicatory system is dismal in that regard. Their conviction rate is less than 8%. Of that, mind you, of only that 20% that's even been reported. So it's a broken system. It's just not working. And it's not that the people at the top aren't, well-meaning and trying, but it's not working. Now, the civilian system doesn't work perfectly either, and rape is hard to prosecute. But what you're looking at there is you're looking at conviction rates of around 40%. What I ask when I see the insistence that, Secretary Panetta responded by elevating up the chain. So now it's not a direct commander, it's further up the chain. Why is that needed? Like, what value, what benefit does that give to the military at all? Historically, the need for the chain of command to have this complete control over punishment and adjudication made sense. Because in the old days, you know, you'd get sent out, there'd be no communication. If a crime happened, you know, back in the day, if a crime happened on a Navy ship, the commander could throw the perpetrator overboard. End of story, punishment, done. Okay, that doesn't make sense anymore. And so I look at it not, you know, I don't, of course it's not power being taken from me, and I understand how if you are a commander, you don't want to give up that power. But what is the benefit of keeping that structure in place? Like, why do you need a commander to open the door to justice? There is a functioning military judicial system. Why can't everybody just access it directly? As a civilian, if I'm raped, I go tell the police. The DA has prosecutorial discretion as to whether or not to prosecute. But there's no barrier between me and justice. And that's what I find so troubling, is that the people that I represent, you know, they are willing to give their life to defend the Constitution, defend this nation. And yet they don't have the same constitutional rights that those of us who aren't willing to do that have. It seems very unfair to me. So I see no upside to keeping it in the chain of command. You know, the people running the military, they need to be running the military. They do not need to be dogging the judicial system. It should be there, it should operate, and you should have direct access to it. And you know, the only reasons to the contrary are the ones I don't like. Well, the chain of command needs to be involved because they need to be able to, I mean, as it is right now, a commander can say, all right, I've got this, you know, alleged perpetrator, I've got this person saying that, you know, he raped me, but you know what, he's a damn good soldier and she's kind of so-so, so I'm not gonna refer it for adjudication. That is the military readiness argument, the military argument as to why you would still need that, but nobody actually voices that because it doesn't sound good, does it? So I don't think there's no real benefit to keeping it in the chain of command. And so, you know, I know the military, the thing I don't like is the military's had a lot of time to solve this problem. It's not a new problem. Tailhook was back in '91. You know, come on, it's not being solved.
Can you hear me? Yes. You're absolutely right. We do have a problem in the military as a whole. All the services do, and I think we're working towards steps to fix that. But one of the things that I think also is broken is the whole entire process. So from the point where a person is raped or sexually assaulted, going to report it. It's a restricted or unrestricted report. If it's an unrestricted report where everyone does know about it, that victim tends to get re-victimized over and over again, right? So they have to tell their story again and again. On top of that, if you don't have the proper medical examiner to take that evidence and link that to the actual victim and then take it properly with the DNA, the case is going to get thrown out in court. If you don't have the proper investigators that are properly trained to go through the process and investigating it properly, it's going to get thrown out. If you don't have a commander that is properly trained to be able to look at all that evidence and say, hey, this needs to go up to a higher level. And in this process, as a commander, I've also been a commander, I just left command. You know, a smart commander would go and get legal advice. And being a Marine and a female, to me, you know, I have trust and confidence in my chain of command. I don't want it to go outside the military. And when I talk to my female Marines about that, and it might just be because I am a female and maybe they relate with me better, and I did have instances inside my chain of command, inside my actual command, and I talk to the women, they say the same thing. Now on the flip side, I've also talked to other women who came and talked to me about this issue because I'm very passionate about this. And when the chain of command does fail them, they do feel let down. And because we've had instances where leaders have not reacted or been impartial, like you talk about, and they say, oh, well, he's a good Marine or he's a good soldier, and you know, she's got serious issues and it's probably her fault anyways. And that's the reason why we do have a problem in the military, and that's why we're going to fix it. I think on top of everything else that becomes a priority, you know, we've been at war for 10 years, PTSD, suicides. there's so many competing priorities, and this is just as important as all the other ones. It's hard to rack and stack what the, and this is going to be maybe not the right way to define it, but what's the flavor of the month, and what's the leadership from DOD, our civilian leadership, to the Congress down, what's the important issue this month? And maybe it's suicide, maybe it's sexual assault. So my question, getting back to it, is I believe, from my experience, it's the whole process that needs to work. And I know you're pinpointing the commander, but I would just be interested to hear your insight to that and what you think about that.
Well, I agree with you that the whole process is at issue, and I think what you see, I mean, the military has a parallel adjudicatory system, right? So there's no reason why it can't function properly. The reason I focus on the chain of command is I don't think there should be a barrier to entry into that military adjudicatory system. So I'm not talking about taking all of these rape allegations outside the military. I'm just saying remove the chain of command as the doorkeeper. I don't see that that serves any benefit whatsoever. I do think that you're going to see an improvement in the adjudicatory process in terms of rape and sexual assault because it is the flavor du jour. And so, you know, Secretary Panetta has issued, it's kind of come down from on high, you know, this needs to get better. So you're starting to, you know, they have now the special victims units, you're going to start to see better training. There's some easy fixes. I mean, rape and sexual assault are hard to prosecute, yet to date, the military gave the baby lawyers that job, you know, the brand new JAGs. The more seasoned JAGs would then become the defense attorneys. All of this, I would say, the one thing that you need to be careful of, and this is what I worry about, this is why I firmly believe there needs to be civilian control over the reform process. In matters of crimes and in the adjudication of whether or not somebody's guilty, you do not want there to be a mandate on high. You do not want it to be like Secretary Panetta says, get a conviction rate up to 98%. You know, that's the problem with this issue. You need to understand that there are a lot of constitutional rights at stake. The rights of the victims, the rights of the perpetrators, and, you know, why reinvent the wheel? The civilian world went through a lot of effort to improve the civilian court's best practices on rape prosecution. There's a lot of learning out there that can simply be lifted and used in the military system. The problem is the military tends to be a little bit insular. They think they can, you know, it's their problem, they're going to fix it. It has been how long now since Tailhook? I have to say, when I first got into this, I got into it, I'm a military kid, I grew up on military bases. And I know the military has a lot of control over the community because when I was a girl and I returned my library books late, the general would call my dad and ream him out and say, Frank, your girls haven't got their library books back. So when I was first approached by somebody to help them, I remembered vaguely Tailhook, and I thought, oh, I'm sure this is, you know, it's got to be not much of a problem anymore. You know, after Tailhook, there was all that energy and attention. I'm sure the military's, you know, functioning really smoothly on this issue. No. So, I mean, you know, it's been long enough to self-correct. We need outside efforts. We need outside supervision of this.
And I agree with you 100%. I think that oversight is important in fixing this problem, but I think the process is in the middle. That's what leads some commanders, even if they're doing due diligence in being unbiased, you know, the evidence isn't there, or the attorney's a terrible attorney, or the whole process is broken. I think pointing at just the chain of command, yes, it's an easy thing to do, but I think looking at the whole entire process from start to finish, I think that's where the issue is.
The other parts of the process are more comfortable to those of us who are used to impartial judicial processes. So, you know, it's the commander that hasn't, I mean, you talk about, you know, the weight of the evidence. Well, the commander hasn't gone to law school and they've never tried a case. There's absolutely no way they know whether or not somebody could get a conviction with that evidence.
And I agree, and with good commanders, that's why we have our judge advocates who are there to advise us based on the evidence that either the medical people have given the investigators, and based on that and how they collect it, that's what's going to get us a conviction.
But the reality of, I mean, in a sense, it's like the equivalent of like a human resources department. I mean, a lawyer that's giving advice to a commander, a JAG, that's not a prosecutor. I mean, what you need to look at is, not all lawyers have the same skill sets. So, you know, so a commander turning to their JAG and saying to the JAG, hey, you know, do you think somebody could get a conviction? That person maybe has never tried a rape case. So, I mean, I just, you know, I think until someone articulates what's the upside of having the chain of command in, it seems to me an easy fix.
We have time for one more question here.
I'd like all of you to answer the question on what kind of effect the social media and the regular TV, CNN, newspapers, etc. have on Lackland, Tailhook. This is why Lackland is so important right now, is because it's in the news. And so if all of you psychologically, service-related, would comment on that, please.
Well, I think it's huge. And I think that the media, but particularly the internet, just is everything that always was, a whole lot faster and bigger. And I think that terrible things and wonderful things can expand more quickly. And I think that we just need to think of it as a tool, but the impact has been huge. I can just speak from our groups, and you know well because you're a member of them. People are able to help each other out around broken systems. When they can't get what they need from the VA, they can find a sister veteran in their Facebook group who will either come over and have coffee and chocolate or drive them to an ER.
I'd like to also speak about changing policy. That would be
right, and it's gaffer tape for broken systems until they fix it.
Yeah, I think you can't underestimate the power of the media, and what I would salute is the courage of those willing to come forward with their personal narratives. I mean, you've got to respect the courage of each of these women, because who wants to get out there and say I was raped? So I applaud the courage of those folks.